All right, I think that this is working. Hi, guys. Okay, let me know. Yeah? Okay. Hello. Hello. Welcome to second week. Cool. Yes. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for your patience. Technology and I are not friends, but here we are and we made it happen. We used to be friends when I was younger. We all know that story when technology wasn't nearly as advanced at all, even a little bit. So, how can we even dare say it? Oh, good morning. All right. So, last week we talked a lot about building out from outer frame into a smaller frame into smaller frame. So basically, essentially framing and then detailing as we get smaller. And that is what we need to set up for moving forward into different types of perspectives. It just basically gives us a better idea of how to like look at something that's 3D and make it 2D, even if that means using perspectives. So yes, Diane said 1 point perspective, exactly. And we're going to use those principles and expand them a little bit. I just have to say that oh my gosh, all week, week, I don't know if that's a term, but week, I was able to see many of the pieces that y'all did. Oh my gosh, like it was bringing me so much joy because you not only did, you know, architectural building stuff, but you were also doing like objects or shelves full of objects. And it was just so fun to see how interpretation was. Yeah, Jay uses yesterweek. So thank you. So yeah, it's just so fun to see how everybody interprets things. And also what's so interesting to me is to see what it is that piques each person's interest. So for example, if we were all looking, let's say we all go to the grocery store, and why is that an example when I don't like the grocery store? That's okay. Let's say that we all go to the grocery store and we're all in the produce section, and we're not looking at, we can't actually for some reason comprehend what everybody else is thinking or doing. All we can do is choose the area that we choose to focus on. Everyone's is going to be different, and if it's not different, it's going to be in the sense of perspective, because we don't visually see the same like actual, like literal or just imaginative viewfinder of what other people are seeing and doing and translating and essentially interpreting on paper. If we all did look at the same orange stand, then we're all going to draw that quite a bit differently than the person next to us, because we all have our own interpretation, etc. So you get what I'm saying. We're going to move into some fun stuff today. And what you need today is the same stuff that we used yesterday. Depending on how far we get, we may or may not introduce a little bit of color. I have a feeling we will, but so if you want to grab any sort of color at all, it could be a marker, it could be watercolors, it can be anything, then you can, but just know that I'm not guaranteeing that because we have time. And I really want to give you guys overall just the best fluid experience in this series, if that makes sense. Vitamins, iron. It's fine. I forgot. And then I was like in my hand this whole time. So it's not forgotten. All right. So a couple of questions that you guys had at the tail end of last week was, does the tip size of your pen matter? And so I just want to show you an example. This is an 05 and an 01. And the reason why it matters is because it's not like they can't draw the same thing. It's just that one's going to be much finer detail than the other. So as an example, if I was to draw this chimney, exactly like so, really well. Is that what I mean? Really, really well. If I was to draw that, or if I was to draw it, here, it's a little bit different. I'll bring this a lot closer so you can see. Now that's a pretty small detail. So if I make that a little bit bigger, okay, and then I was to draw this part bigger, now you really start to notice the difference in size. So it's like this, depending on the size, if you have a smaller tip pen, you might find that it looks almost like a sketch or a little bit unfinished. It's not, it's just that the size of the pen is smaller. And so in that case, you might need to, or might want to rather go over it a couple of times for it to darken, or you might want to add some shading, you know, or maybe more detail, whatever the case may be. But the problem is, remember last week when we were talking about what you want to omit as far as detail and what you want to add. So if I was to then go in, you know, want to go in and do all of this brick lay, well, suddenly this has a ton of detail and it's just up here. So what does that mean for the rest of my house? It doesn't mean it has to detract. It just means the rest of this house has to have a significant amount of detail to stand out against this tiny, tiny little portion. So if you ever have a situation where, let me make a really bad example really fast. Let's see, paper. Like the one thing you would think that would be easy to find. Okay, so let's say we have like, we draw a flower and I'm just like, pretend this is the center. It is the center. Okay, here's the center. All right, so let's say we have this flower and we have a petal that comes out like so, and it kind of looks sloppy and weird. Well, it's not, it's just, it looks unfinished because it doesn't have the amount of interest. It looks really light because of how large it is. However, coming on in, if I was to do a flower, same style, and I made it this size, suddenly, do you see how the boldness of it, it starts to make it, it looks like it's more intentional this way. It looks correct, whereas this just looks kind of out of place. So if I was to go in and do a ton of like tiny details throughout here, it's just a totally different aesthetic than if I was to come in and just do a couple here and move on, if that makes sense. So difference in tip sizes. Now, on the flip side, if you have like an 05 or an 08 even, if you were to do the same exact thing, so this keeps getting out of focus. There we go. If I was to do the same thing, so let's say I have a petal, I'll just go over this one, and it's this thick, that looks more intentional, and I would be able to build this up, you know, and make it look on purpose. Whereas if I did it really small and I did the same thing that I did with this flower with the smaller tip, it doesn't look bad by any means. It just gives it a different aesthetic. So it looks a little bit more, this one does look a little bit more defined and bold, but some people do prefer more of a wispy, you know, what have you. But let's say this was an 08, and then the lines would start looking, they would be a lot thicker. So they would kind of look like that. That starts looking a little bit doodly and a little bit cartoony almost because of the lack of detail. So that is, can someone tell Carrie in the chat to press play? Sometimes that's what I know, that the live thing is weird. It's funny, like the one time I look in the chat, it's like I want to respond. But now I'm looking. Are smaller tips better for shading and detail? Not necessarily. In theory, yes, because you're going to be able to do more and you're going to be able to reach into smaller places. But the size of what you're drawing is also going to determine that. So this house, for example, I did the whole thing in 05, and you can see like the windows, like if I wanted to take more time, instead of going lightly on the, dividers inside of the glass, I could have used my 01, and I'll just go next to it so you can see what that looks like. And it's just a little bit cleaner instead of being like this wispy, like quick thing that I did with the 05. It's cleaner as far as being consistent across the board. The other part of this though, and don't let this confuse you, but the quick wispiness that gets your pen to be lighter. Why does this keep, it's focusing on my hand and not what I'm doing. Okay. That is also a straighter line than if I was to drag it down slowly. So that's another thing to keep in mind is like, okay, do I want this line to be intentionally wobbly? Do I want it to be straight, or do I want it to be wispy? Do I want it to be more characteristic? And those are all things that you will learn from your own, not just with time and practice, but from your own muscle memory and the way that you work when you're sketching. And honestly, like you guys, so you watched me do this whole house. It was a hot mess in the first, at least third. And you know what I'm talking about. Like I, with you, looked at it and was like, I don't know how I'm going to salvage this, but like, I'm not turning back because and I feel like that a lot of times when I'm sketching is like, okay, just power through this. Like, even if it isn't great at the end, I can play and it's practice. But then usually 9 times out of 10, those are my favorite pieces because it was a challenge. And then I like surprised myself with what I was able to come up with at the end. So that's what I want to say about that. Now I'm going to grab the image references that I want to share with you. This morning I went downstairs because I have a whole like craft little nook in our garage, and I was looking for a magazine that might have some architecture so that I didn't run into the same problem we had last week. Well, I have no idea, like, do I only like to have magazines that are like, I don't know, vintage plants? Like, it's just like so weird. I'm looking through everything, like everything's outside, but it's in my like collage section. It doesn't matter. So I'm presenting pictures that were taken when we were in Spain and Portugal. And yeah, my ink is low. I'm just being real, but it's okay because we're sketching and that's not the point. So what I want to share is the 2-point perspective now is what we're going to look at. I'm going to move this house out of the way so it's not distracting. And we're just going to look at, vanishing points, horizon lines. See, this is what I'm talking about. Don't look at the ink running out. I don't use this printer very often. And then we're going to identify the areas that we're going to pay attention to when we are sketching it. So when the first thing that I like to do, I'm going to dismiss these, is this one is going in. So 2-point perspective is slight. So we see the edge of the building right here. Okay. So I'm just going to edge of this building right there. So then you see the side of it, you see the front of it. If ever you are confused about this, take a note on how many sides of a building you're seeing. So that's super helpful. So like, let's say you're from above, like you're in this balcony and you see these sides, but you also see the top. That'll be 3-point perspective. That's a whole other thing. I don't even go there because it's like my brain, I don't like it. But I also don't like to draw things that are too like realistic-y looking. I don't know. So we know that that's the edge of the building. We see side A, side B. And just as a cute little FYI, when we were over here, this is in Sevilla in Spain, and Laura and I stayed on the top right here. So we had this little balcony split. Oh, no, not I don't even know where that was because we were on the top, but this balcony and it was so cute. It was too hot to be out there, but so cute. And all these trees, it was just this huge courtyard to the left of just the most pungent orange trees. So if that sets a scene, it's just nice to do stuff like that when you're sketching, because it just brings that life in, which is why I say so much. I'm telling you this so that I can reemphasize how fun it is to be able to draw on location. So if I'm here, I could set up and I could sketch from where I'm taking this picture from, which is really fun. So, all right. That said, paint a picture, fun. Now let's go. Here is our vanishing point. So I'm just going to do just a little X here because I can see that that is what I'm looking at. From there, I see that there's this curb. So it essentially makes it so there's this like invisible line through this area here. The reason why this matters is because since this is our vanishing point, AKA, well, and horizon line. So like our horizon line, if these buildings weren't here, would be about here. And remember, that's where the ground meets the sky. Our vanishing point will be typically along those lines. This is important because everything that we see from where we are, our eyes are going to lead into that point. So that means that these buildings, you can see that they are all along the same part of the ground here. If we were standing in front of them, they would look straight like this because that's the vanishing point. We see them moving here. I'll make this darker, moving that direction. Same thing here. So this actually starts later than this one. So it's up a little bit, but then it will go in the same direction. So you can see that they move and they're going to meet essentially. The buildings here, because I'm so close to this one, we can't see where it starts. So even if the buildings were all the way out here, they're going to have the vanishing point that meets there. But because they're here, it's kind of going straight down because I'm in line with them. Whereas this one is going down like this. Now, there's not like a trick for this for like, oh, well, how do you know it's this versus it's literally where you're standing and how tall buildings are. So if this right here was the roof, even though it's just part of this building, it's going toward that vantage point, or excuse me, vanishing point. But technically that could be the top of it too. So just know that all these like streamlines, all these lines that are things that you focus on when you're looking into a vanishing point, they're all going to meet there, all those streamlined areas. So like these are the windows from these buildings, you can see too, those are in line, even if they're at different heights. It's kind of like heads when we were talking last week about how if you see people and all their heads are essentially along the same line, they're just bobbing up and down. Windows can do that too. It's the principle of the meeting point. Okay. So once you know that, that's when we can start actually framing. That's when we can start putting this stuff in. And this is where scale really comes into play. So let's start doing that so that you can see that process. And let me make this straight. I'm going to try this again because last week I was thinking about last week and I was like, wait, so when I tried to pin that, it pinned my face only. And I was like, oh, well, that's not going to work. But then I was like, Peggy, why didn't you just pin the other one and see if that would work, since one of them did in fact work? So I don't know if this is going to work because I'm the host. It's so weird. It's so dumb. And I have a delay, so it's going to show me in a minute, but I pinned this and I just want to see if it's going to work or if it's just going to pin my face. I swear no, it's just my face. Dang it. I don't know why that is, but I'm wondering if maybe, so if I pin my face, will it do it? Is the question of the day. I'm just going to wait a minute and try this. And if we can do it, then that would be great. Let's see. What if it just stays on my face this whole time and I don't actually see any switch? And then I think that I'm waiting for something, but I'm not. And then you guys are just staring at my face this whole time. Nope. See, I see myself. It's not working. All right. That's fine. I literally pinned the first video and then the second video. It's not working. So it will work if I add a third camera and then I pin, which is weird, but it's like, I don't have how many devices do I need? I'm done messing around. Okay. So I'm gonna use it's fine. I'm going to use this area right here. And let me tell you something. It's not because the photo is this big. It is because you guys are awesome. It's because I know the size of pen that I'm using and I know the size that I want that to be drawn within, and it's not going to be like this perfect framing right here, and I don't even have to draw this framing in. I'm just doing this to be visual for everybody so that you can kind of see like but conveniently it just so happens to be about the same size. So, hey, all right, so let's viewfinder this, right? So, okay. If I was to be, if I was standing here and that's what I saw, like I could narrow it in right here. I could narrow it in right here and do something. So keep that in mind. This is what I've come up with. Now that I've identified, obviously, if you're like in person, you're not going to be able to marker Sharpie all over the scene. So what I like to do is just visualize it. You're sitting there, you're visualizing it's not going anywhere. You can draw invisible lines in your mind. So that being said, I also have to keep my frame in mind. So just like we did last week when I was thinking, measurement wise, and I always eyeball, I'm not too particular about it. I think, okay, where is my horizon line, my vanishing point? Where are those in my frame? So let's say this is a full piece of paper. It can also just be the spot that I've laid out here. And so I'm looking at my vanishing point in terms of the entire scene. And I would say that if I was to divide the scene into thirds, it's approximately on the bottom. Like if I was to do thirds horizontally and thirds vertically, so they're like boxes, it would essentially be the corner that connects in the bottom right. So I'm just going to, I can do a tiny little X, I can do whatever I want to do, but that's basically where I know everything's leading to. When I do that right from the start, I'm setting myself up for success. Okay, Susie, I keep reading your comment and it's throwing me because I do want you guys to have a reference also. So what I'm going to do is real quickly, I don't think I can add things to this, but I'm just going to throw it up into Drive real quick. So I'm going to tell you guys a cute story. No, I'm not. That's too much in my brain to think. Here's my story, but I do want, that way you guys can see the image right away. So I just have to grab it out of the trash. Oh, you guys don't mind. It's good. It's a good question though, because I would like you to have it. Give me a hot second. I wish I had some, it's like back in the day, I used to be able to, I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to do it a different way. I used to be able to multitask so easily. My brain would just like, sorry if you hear that mouse, it's so annoying. I would just be able to easily talk and do this. And it's like, I can't, it just doesn't happen anymore. And so then I get in my head a bit. It's fine. We're almost there. We're almost there. We're almost there. Got it. All right. So I'm going to pull this over here, put it into Drive and give you guys a share link so that you can pull it up on your devices real quick, which I think will be helpful. All right, here we are. And we've got share. Thanks for your patience. I think there's always something to learn, always ways to improve. All right, here we go. I just got back to the chat. I see what you guys are saying. I'm going to pin this. So it will be at the top. It should be share settings should be on, but all right, there it is. Okay, that makes me feel so much better because I saw what Susie said and I just like couldn't shake it. I'm like, no, I want this to happen now. I want this to happen now. All right. Nothing's going on in your life, nothing to cause a brain fog. Thank you. I feel like I feel very seen. I feel very seen right now. Okay, it sounds like you guys got it. That makes me happy. And you can see that the color is actually much better. So really, really don't judge my ink right now. It's not my ink, it's the printer's ink, it's not mine. All right. Bad jokes all day long. I got them. Good. I'm glad you can see the detail. So we have our vanishing point set in place. We know where our invisible horizon line is because of it. If you want to do little like notches so that you know, then that's cool. Sometimes it's helpful. I'm pretty sloppy when I do stuff like this. So as you know, I will draw a line all the way through my whole thing just so that I know where it is. I know it is a huge difference. Okay, for the record though, I'm pretty sure that I printed the original and not the color enhanced one. And I think I gave you guys the enhanced one that I edited in like Color Story or Lightroom or something. So you do have a little more vibrance. I don't know. It was like whatever I could find first. That's all I cared about. All right. So anyway, that's funny. All right. So from here, what I like to do is I kind of like to just map out essentially in like lines or dots or something, the main areas that I've mapped out visually here. And that would mean I'm like, so everything that I did here, I'm actually like looking at the object, like in theory, right? I'm looking at it and I'm thinking about it. I know what my viewfinder showed. So in my mind, I have my framing and I'm just marking, I look and I mark down on my paper where I'm seeing things that will help with my process. So in this case, I can do this line right off the bat because I know that it's a straight line and I know that it goes in yay, so high length. But the middle, so this, I just want to really say like, yes, I see that this is offset and it's just slightly to the right of what the middle of this page is. I also know that my framing is more narrow than what I'm seeing here. So I'm going to go slightly in, but everything that I draw here, I want in here. So remember creative choices. We don't have to measure things perfectly. I'm going into this knowing that this part is going to be just a little bit, just a smidge smushed. So if you're wondering like, okay, well, how did I measure that? Or what was the deal here? Just know that it doesn't have to ever be perfect. So you get to decide that. All right. So I'm looking at the bottom here. And if I was to measure that, if I was to do the trick that we talked about where you hold your finger out and you kind of like measure it with your thumb and you see your whole framing. If I go 1, then it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many of those up the page? Well, that's too many. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to eyeball it and say, how did this happen? And say, okay, well, here's my vanishing point-ish. It's maybe, I don't know, a little below that. That's a good way to do it. So I'm going to go about, another way to do it is like, how much room do I have with the bottom of the frame? Okay, so it sits about in the middle of it, maybe slightly under. So I'll go about right here, a little past the middle. I'm spending too much time on this only so that you guys can feel confident in your first line. I didn't do this very dark, but this is essentially my first line. Okay, so I'm going to commit to it. It's dark, it's in there. And now that framing that we did, I can either jump into that with this building or I can continue to map out. I work very like chaotically in the sense of I want to be able to build up the way that it works for my mind. And I want you guys to, to adopt that as well. So you can definitely sketch main parts out. I would typically just start in with the basic frame. And by that, I mean like a square. So I know where the building is. I will do this first line just so I know how high up it goes. Don't worry about any detail coming off of that line or if anything goes in or off. We're going to deal with that later. The idea is, okay, how tall is this? Like that's literally all I want to know. And if I look at the distance between my vanishing point and the bottom of my frame, I would say it's about that from the top. Okay, it is. At least this little thing is, this little thing, proper term. Wow, I don't know. The balcony, the top of the balcony thing. So I don't want to bring up the wall necessarily that high, but I'm going to eyeball and think, okay, it's about here. So I'm just going to draw a straight line and then I can have it kind of fade off so that I can define it later. Okay, that's in place. So I know this is a building. This is going to be a building. I'm going to deal with it later, but now it's in place and now I can continue working with my vanishing point and whatnot. I made this a little trickier than it needed to be because I could have had this bottom line that's hard to see, I know. I could have had it be all even with like a set of buildings on one side, set of buildings on the other side, and then in the middle, pediment. Thank you, Marietta. In the middle, that was where our vanishing point went, or off to the side or whatever, but to have that all be even. But the reason I didn't is because how often are we going to go out into the world and we're like, okay, I'm going to do my 2-point perspective now. And then you're trying to look for the perfect scene, but you run into something like this where it's just too tall, or you're like, okay, well, if I hadn't taken this picture, I might have not thought of how I could cut this building off. I might have thought, okay, I have to include all this, and then it wouldn't have looked correct because I'm trying to figure out how to like force a roof in where it doesn't actually fit in our viewfinder of how we're interpreting 3D into 2D on paper. Is that overcomplicated? Yes, which is why I'm simplifying it now so that you don't wow. Wow, what is happening? I just said it, right? The word, and then it's gone. This is really gonna tear me up all day if I can't figure out Okay, I gotta let it go, but it's like, wow, my brain. Complicate. Why did I want to say complify? It doesn't matter. I'm letting it go. Okay, I'm gonna overcomplicate. Okay, that's why. So I was right, Jay. Oh, my brain is not working. It's not working. You guys are the best. Truly though, overcomplicate. Yeah. What is the deal with me? You guys have that where you're like, how do you spell they? It's like something you've spelled your whole life. And you're like, I don't know. Is it THAY? So please tell me I'm not alone in that. Like we have these just complete brain farts and they last. And the older we get, the longer they last. Please tell me I'm not alone. All right. Over that. Let's keep going. Overcomplicate. There we go. That's why I don't want you to overcomplicate it for yourself. End of sentence. Got it. Now, if I look at this scene, right, in my viewfinder, if I have to hold up my arms a million times, I'll do it. I see that the buildings are not coming off the side. They're actually coming off of the bottom of my framing and then going into the vanishing point. Now, something to keep in mind is we have not actually drawn the side of this building yet. So when we connect these, they're not meeting this point. They are, thank you, Elizabeth. She said you were trying to say complicate and simplify at the same time. And thank you. Why is it so hard though? Like, it's like not a hard concept to grasp. Like I'm a smart person. You guys know what I'm talking about. So that being said, I'm going to need to allow for this side of the building and for this side while having space here. So if that means adding just another little dot so that I can force myself to keep that spacing in, then I will do that. And again, it does not matter where these live specifically, precisely, words. It just matters that they're, that it's going to be there. So, and then seeing where it ends, it can be anywhere here as long as we're going to then use the right scale once we start adding more things in. I'm just going to assume this is midway point down there, and I'm just going to draw like a line right here. It looks like this not so sure face. I'm not so sure about this. Hyper. Looks like I'm hyper today. You guys, I just want to talk to you. Like you just like the chat. I just want to talk to you and talk to you and talk to you. We're playing. All right, here we go. So since that's there, I think of this as kind of like the line, the horizon line. It's like the only sliver of what we can see of the horizon line. This building does not reach that far. So don't let that confuse you. So just know, okay, I'm at this angle. How do I know what angle to do? Well, we've gone over this. From here, we're meeting to that vanishing point. So I know that it goes to that angle, but it's also not going very far out. It's only going just a sliver of space so that I can add the rest in. I don't recommend, I do need to do more. I used to do in-person sessions all the time, Diane, for urban sketching. It was the best ever. I do need to do more of them. Okay, I'm not looking. Now I don't recommend adding the side of the building before you add the part that comes down. The reason is because it's so easy to just like miss that crucial point of needing to or being able to properly have that go into the vanishing point the way that it should. It can go up too high and then it's just like, oh, I didn't, that was too, I didn't do that right. And that sucks because then you have this weird line sticking out of the top when that's supposed to be sky. So I'm going to just leave that for now. I might just start the line and then leave it. So now I know that's there. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. I know it's coming from the bottom here. And then I know that it's going to stop around this space right here because that's where I've created the width of my horizon line. So I don't overthink it. I just draw it in. But the cool part about this is that now, in theory, these buildings are going to just, and I'm going to do this lightly because I know that there's going to be some stuff overlapping, but I will start to draw this up just slightly, remember, because I don't want to take away from the roof part. So that I know, and now I have a visual. Okay, this now looks like without shading, without detail, without shapes, without anything. I know that this is a walkway. Like you can already see it coming to life that easily, just based off of those elements that you're ensuring to. So just as a recap, okay? I find my vanishing point, which is the horizon line. Richard said the horizon line is behind the end of the alley, and that's why the building's walls don't meet at the end of the alley. Correct. Yeah. The vanishing point is behind the wall of the alley. That's better put, because that way it's like you said, there are in so many circumstances, you're not going to find the true vanishing point when you're in the middle of a bunch of buildings, because it will live behind where the rest of our eyes can take us. So we'll be met with something in the way. But so in theory, because the vanishing point is one point, it's one point. It doesn't have a hard stop like this that has a line in the way. So we're essentially moving toward that. When we have that in place, we know where our horizon line is. Everything else, we're just kind of mapping out. So this is a 2-point perspective, Melinda. The way you know is the easiest way for me is like, there's going to be some depth involved. And when you see two sides of a building, just make sure you don't see three, like you want to know what you're looking at, but I see 1, 2. So side A, side B, and then there's some depth involved because of that. That's a 2-point perspective. It's the easiest way that I grasped it when I was learning about it. Okay, so from here, remember, we're just framing out, we're just putting in the main details, and then we will be able to work in, shading and detail and all that kind of stuff. But for now, I'm looking at, okay, let's say my viewfinder's up, or I'm looking at this picture, but hopefully you can go on location and do this. I see that my building's roofs are also off the page. This part can be a little bit tricky. I'm going to make a little bit of a creative choice, and I want you to trust me on it. The nice thing about roofs, though, is that they're not, I'm not even going to say that because I don't want to confuse you. Okay. I basically just want to make sure that it doesn't look, because this is pretty vertical, and then it goes actually vertical. I'm going to make the creative choice of slanting it about right here. So I'm going to assume the buildings kind of stop here and the roof starts. And I'm just going to slant it a little bit further so that it doesn't look, so it looks right. So it looks right. How about, so I'm going to bring it in. So here, maybe come up to about right here. So that's where I'll draw my line to. And then the rest of it just slightly more at an angle than it would be actually. So then I can really see the more defined buildings, and then build those out, if that makes sense. So creative choices, we are empowered to make them. All right, now we have the main parts framed. I don't necessarily want to do much to the top of this just yet because it's not part of my main framing. I'm also it's also super tall, so that can be confusing too, because then we're seeing, you know, two sides of this part. Well, do I draw those two sides? Well, this comes back to the chimney last week. It's like, well, how much detail do you really need in that chimney? Do you really need to draw it in 2-point perspective? Not really. So another creative choice. You absolutely can. It's going to look awesome if you do, of course. But I just like the quaintness of just like picking and choosing what I want to add detail to. Okay, so this part of the building, I'm just going to call it good right around here. And I'm going to make sure that I'm going toward my vanishing point. So it's not like, okay, well, it dips down, so I'm going to go this way. No, that's why we have a guide. That's why we spent so much time defining what the guide looked like. I keep looking out as if this building's right in front of me. It's not. So I know that it's going down at kind of a steeper angle than I would otherwise think. And it's also going to match up to about right here. So if I kind of hover, then I know, okay, well, toward the horizon line, got it. About here, question mark? Well, maybe a little further, because if I bring this up, it will meet right here. So then I have it, and it's now in. It's now been drawn. It's now there. We have some definition now. Up here is going to get a little confusing, and I am kind of sorry for it, but you're going to like it, and it's okay. Like, you're going to like that it was a little bit harder. I could have given you something flat, but nobody wants to do that. No, but well, yeah, I do all the time. Okay, so now, actually, a good idea for me. I've drawn over so much of this detail there. Now I have it up too. And perfect. Oh, that's so much better. You're right. Because even I keep looking in the camera, doesn't matter. Oh, I feel cheery today. So this door right here, something you'll notice is that this is like a framing part. It's not like it stops right here. It actually goes down further. I'm going to choose to have the border the whole way down. I'm not going to do it yet, but these are things that I just want to have look more solid and a little less intricate, because my eye is drawn mostly on the building that's right in front of us. For that reason, now that these things are in place, I'm going to start building out the way that we did last week when we were creating our house, where it's just basic building blocks. So this right here is, let's see, it looks like this right here is about a square, but there is a balcony here that makes a dip. And so knowing that, I can pretty much draw that square in, and because it's almost a perfect square in my framing anyway, I know that it'll go up to about here because that makes my square, but then just about past the halfway part here, it starts to go and has this little dip down and then continues on. So that's all I'm going to do for now. I'm just building that square. And then I will look at the rest of it as isolated squares. So this is going to help a lot, because all of this, that's a lot going on. So when there's multiple dimensions, 3D spaces, remember, every time that I get like distraught or I try to remember rules, the number one thing that helps me like actually hone back in is think, okay, wait, all we're doing is we're making this 3D into 2D. So how can I do that? And that is where I'm like, okay, well, here's another square right here. Like, this doesn't have to be this big jumble mess. This is a smaller square. And then here is a smaller square, but it's overlapping, which makes it kind of a rectangle-y type of thing. So if it's a square from here, then it probably goes up to about here. Like, this is truly how sloppy I think about this process, but it helps. And then this is, you know, that square I was talking about. Okay. And then it comes in just a little bit from that balcony. There's my square. And then here is where that connection happens. It looks like it raises just a little bit above what I did. Two things I can do here. One, I'm super lucky because we have a real thick border, so I can draw a line higher and have that be more accurate. So if I draw a line higher here and then draw a line lower here, it makes it look like they're closer together than they just were. And then I can draw that connection point a lot easier than trying to just overlap or something. But the second thing I could have done was just said, oh, well, oh, well, this is my transfer onto paper. Does it have to perfectly match up and perfectly measure and perfectly scale? No, it sure doesn't. So that's my favorite choice. But I do like to know these types of tips, which do help as you're working on something. So if you see that kind of an opportunity, like, oh, but there's these really thick gutter framing. Nope. There's these thick lines. Okay. There's these thick lines that are going to save me. I'll draw one above here. I'll draw one below here. And then it's going to make it so that it is a lot more flowy. It's closer together. It's what we intended to do. All right. So from there, there's this small spot where this part, the second part of that wall comes down. So we see that. And it's starting to build. What I do want to do is create the border, the thick line, if you will, right here, so that that's in, and then I can kind of see that better. And so now, because it's like in front of, you can see without any shading, without any detail, this is like a little cubby, which is that cubby of a balcony, which is so cute and darling and wonderful. You're saying, yeah. Great question. So the little dip, this guy is also aiming to the vanishing point. Absolutely. If it doesn't, like, I didn't say that. I thought because it's so minor that it's like not that big of a deal, but that is a good point. And ideally it would be going that direction as well toward the vanishing point, because it is like one of those horizontal lines. Basically all horizontal lines, unless intentionally wonky, would be pointing toward the vanishing point. Yeah. Well, no, that's not true. If they are on the side if they're on the side that leads to it. So these horizontal lines are straight in front of us, but the horizontal lines on the side that leads to our eyes to it. So like this one here is technically on the right side. So you can see that leads to it. This will go to it. This wall right here, this little gate thing, that leads to it. And then when we look at this wall, this part, bottom of the window leads to it. Up here, balconies lead to it. Up here, this part of the roof leads to it. So that was a good question. And yes, roof lines. Thanks, Marietta. I need Marietta to be my translator of this whole thing. I need you, all of you to. Oh, because my brain is not working, and not usually a problem, but is a problem right now. All right. Now I'm going to put this little slatted roof overhang in now, because I feel myself wanting to do more, and then it's going to get in the way of that. So I'm going to do it a little higher than it's showing here, because I want to lift it. I did this a little bit low. I'm fine with that, but I do want to lift it so that it's not like, I want the doorway to be there. So I actually think I'll start with the doorway. I'll have it stop about here. And if you want to measure, if you like things to be more precise, this is where you can take your pen, hold it out in front of you, measure the doorway. In this case, I'm going to do it against my paper. So I have the tip of my pen to the top of my thumb that I'm holding right here. So then I can go, I know that's the door width. Now I'm going to forget the door width and just think about the width of the building. So I go 1, 2, 3, 3.5. So the door is about, I'm just going to say 3. So it's about a third. That's going to help me just think about, where that's going to sit, whatnot. You can measure however you want to. The whole point is to be able to use something against something else to help you visualize it. You can do the same thing where I'm looking at the height. So I'm using my finger, and now I'm looking at that square that I had initially drawn. So I've got 1, about 1 3/4. So it's going to be about 1 3/4 high if you wanted to do that. But remember intentionally doing, leaving room for this slatted overhang. So I'll probably just go up to about right here. Just make sure that it's a door that you can fit your body through. And it doesn't have to be perfect, just a little doorway. And then I can add this guy in, and notice it's offset. And that is because we're seeing, technically, while we are seeing the front of this building, we're also seeing it a little to the left. And so everything's going to be a little differently aligned than if we were standing like smack dab in front of it. And this one is a little bit like, I'm not going to think too much about this overhang. I'm just going to, I mean, you can use the rules that we know to do it, but I don't want a ton of detail in here. I don't need it to be perfect. I can adjust if I need to, but I just basically want to get that placed and then I can come back to it later. So that's my mind frame around it. And you can do that however works best for you. And then I can continue on. One thing that I keep looking at that's kind of throwing me is the fact that this is so large and then it doesn't connect over here. But what I have to remember, and you can attack this, now or later if you have something like this, but when I look at my reference photo, there's a big tree right here, which I do want to include because I love it when there's overlapping greenery. But B, this line doesn't actually exist. This was just my own reference. So sometimes when that's the case, I either draw over it right away so it doesn't keep making me think I need to do this and extend it out, or I'll just extend that line a little bit so that I know it's a guideline, because all those tiny details are going to get lost in your sketch eventually anyway. And I know that some of you are cringing like, oh, I could never do that because that doesn't disappear. And you're right, it doesn't. So I get that, but I just want to remind myself that that's not something I need to extend and make longer, because I'm going to deal with that later because I'm building from out to in. All right, so moving on, this part right here. So this is going to then connect to the side of the building. And this is actually, I'm glad that you asked that, Sue, because this is where that does really matter. This little dip, right? It points toward the vanishing point. Well, as it comes over here, it needs to point toward the vanishing point again. So I think that if we didn't know that, then we might think that we're doing it at the same angle as this, as whatever we ended up doing here, but we actually need it to be a lot sharper because it's going down along that building. And the reason that matters too is, if we think about it, it feels really weird to do it that sharp, but this tiny sliver is actually a lot of real estate that's like smushed in our eyes. So just keep reminding yourself 3D to 2D. And that's going to give you the ability to add exactly what you need to emphasize, like, okay, this is a window area, this is a balcony, this is greenery, this is plants, this is whatever is hanging on this side, so that like, that's the eye knows, okay, it figures out that this is the side of a building without drawing attention away from our focus, but still keeping everything in it, if that makes sense. Okay, so from here, I've got this part, I've got all this in. So I can draw, I already forgot pediment. Pediment. I can draw those coming up and off this area. If you look closely at the picture, you'll see that there are 2 of them stacked right here. That to me is unnecessary in the sketch we're doing because we're not focusing on that top balcony. So I'm making a creative choice here, and I'm going to draw just a skinny rectangle, and I'm going to draw another skinny rectangle right here that's going to be taller because it comes up higher. Maybe I'll bring that up a little bit, and then I'll draw another one right here. And then this building rises, and I'll draw another one about right here because that's going to be layered. But I mean, that's kind of, it's very loose. I'm not worrying about the 2-point perspective. I mean, you could. So if you wanted to do that, just know it's super, super short. It's going toward the vanishing point. It's real skinny. And then you have the side. I mean, you can't even really see it because it's that small of a detail. So you can, but my point here is that I wouldn't, because your detail and the things that you're defining should be a focus on something that is actually what you want the eye to see, what you want to capture. I could go on about that, but all right. So how are we going to build this up? Well, if I look at this whole thing as a whole, it can get confusing again. So that's where I start to break it down again, because that's what's going to keep helping me. So from this point of this pediment, I'm going to see, okay, well, there's basically another block behind that. And then it goes up into this like triangular deal, but the triangular deal, these are all like technical terms. So you're really welcome for learning a bunch of architectural terms. This triangular deal here, you'll see is actually, the point is very offset from the center. So that's something to know. And I could do this now because it's coming off of this point. So yeah, why don't I do that? We can remember, okay, so this is basically the center of it. And if it kind of starts over in this general area, I can just draw a line here, draw a line here. So that's my little blocked spot. I'm not really sure how it connects right here just yet, or how I want it to connect, because I haven't done this part yet. So it's basically just framing. It's making this skeleton. I know that my triangle spot, if I measure it, it's pretty shallow. So I can just add a dot right here, and then like so. And then I have this point. It's just this small like square with a little knobby on the top. Oh my gosh, this language that I have today. So that's kind of what I'm looking at here. And this is more prominent because it is part of the framing. So I'm going to make little knobbies on all of these to really emphasize them so that they stand out for what they are. And then I can continue building. So I'm going to revisit this spot real quick. There is another tiny square deal on top of the border. I'm so sorry about these terms. I should really learn better ones. And then there's like a planter, which I could add later, but I'm just doing it now because it's only one and it's not going to be too distracting. But that way, okay, my balcony is set. I'm going to add my window now. I'm not ready to do windows for everything, but I do just, this part in my brain is throwing me as I'm building onto this. So I just want to have that set. You can measure, you can do all the things, but I'm just going to throw in a window. It's actually a door that comes down, but I don't creative choices, right? So I'm just going to frame that up, call it good, and add more if I want to later. Because there's going to be greenery here. I can bring it down if I want to later. And yes, so from here, that makes me feel a lot better, and it makes me want to do it to here, but I'm not going to just yet. I see, okay, so from here, I'm not even going to draw it in. I see that there's another rectangular-y block. It's a little wider. So basically what I just drew on top here, but it meets kind of in the center of that. So here I'm noticing, okay, I do see quite a bit of the side of this part. So if I draw a line just on the side of that, I can connect this next block just inside that wall. So see what I mean? I drew from the block, if you think of it as a rectangle, from this block, I drew a small, very short line toward the vanishing point, and then just one small line down just to kind of show the illusion of that it's coming down. And then this part is going to connect to that wall, if that makes, I hope that makes sense. And then I'll come straight across and have this meet down, and it just looks more layered that way. Not necessary, but you can make those decisions that way if you want to. And if yours is looking like a hot mess, I mean, I don't know if you noticed, but have you looked at this situation? But remember, you got to trust the process, and it's going to be amazing. Okay, so one of the things about this roof on the top is that it's like really wavy, and I want to kind of emphasize that. And I'm not doing waves, I'm not doing anything particular. I'm just kind of adding scribbles that are offset so that it looks like there's more of an overhang. And you can do them more structured if you want to. There's not like a reason why I wouldn't. It's more just that's kind of my style of what I would want to do because it's so small, and I just want to emphasize texture and nothing else really. Okay, so I feel good about this for the most part. I do have some things to add. I mean, this didn't come up high enough, but I don't, it's not a big deal at all. But now what I have to add are windows, balconies, greenery. So I'll do just the basics of that without the rest of the details before I jump to this side, just for the sanity of not having to like, I was reading the chat, for my sanity, not to have to jump back and forth and try to figure out, okay, where was I? What was I thinking? So I'll start with the balcony here, and I see that it's about in line with the top of this awning. So I went a little bit higher. And then I'm not going to do a ton of detail here because I do want to bring this tree in. So I'm just going to do this square, and then I'll do a series of lines that show that that's in there. And then I'll also do you probably wouldn't even notice this, but a small edge like we would do where it goes toward the vanishing point, and then there's a sliver on the outside. I just want to point out too that somehow this worked in my favor to where that line that I had there is mostly overlapped by the balcony, the top of it. So love a happy accident. Now I can do the window. It's going to be larger than this one. And that's literally the only thing I'm going to think about on this. I'm just overall, it's probably a door. I can't even, yeah, it is a door. I'm just going to do a general framing. I mean, I brought that too far down, but I did all that on purpose. I just wanted to make sure it was bigger so you could see it was more in the foreground, because I'm about to slap a tree right over that babe. That's the technical term of that too. So I hope that you're saying that to yourself when you're drawing. Okay. I'm gonna throw in the one below that. I know it's going to be about the same size. The top of it is about at the bottom of this awning. It is a little higher than this door. I'm going to do, this is like a true creative choice. I don't want it to go higher than the door for me. So I'm just going to, I just made it a little bit smaller. That's just what I wanted to do based off of like when I look at my sketch versus when I look at the reference. It's what I like. It's what I like more for me. So I say do what works for you, because people aren't going to be sitting there comparing what you drew to what it originally looked like. And anytime that happens, just if you have a photo, remove the photo and look at what you're drawing, and then you're going to be able to determine like the things that you want to emphasize, re-emphasize, whatever. But then also you're not like, it's not like comparing at that point. So that said, there's a lot going on inside of here. I'm going to deal with that later. I will draw this little door window stitch just because I know that it's there. I'll draw a small balcony or illusion of a balcony. Sometimes I don't draw all the lines, or I'll draw them really lightly just so that you get that it's there, but it's not really detracting from anything. And then I'll do the same thing here. And then it looks like there's some here, and I'm just going to bring that over enough, but it's not going to connect to anything because that's where my tree is going to be. So I'm not really worried about that. Okay, so balconies in place, windows in place, all the details, shading, greenery is coming later. Now I'm going to start building out this side. And this might seem like, oh gosh, how the heck are we going to draw all those details in this tiny, tiny space? It's all about measuring. So if I look at the space as a whole, that's all I'm looking at. And the first thing I want to draw in is this center. That's easy because we know that's the center, but I see that it's about a third of the way down. So about right here. And I already know that it should be pointed toward my vanishing point, but But this part's important. Should it is the question. Here's why I say it that way. If it's 2/3 of the way up, that means that it's like the second to third layer of this building level rather. So when I get to the very bottom here, and this is my first level, that doesn't make sense. This is actually where this is at. So the vanishing point is here, but if that line went to here, it's going to split that building all sorts of crazy. So it needs to meet an appropriate distance from here in between these two lines. So if I look at this and I say, okay, this is overall in the building about halfway, it's not really 2/3. The reason it looks like 2/3 is because this is coming off the page. But if I look at the buildings as a whole, it's about halfway. So ideally, I'm going to have that meet halfway, not at the vanishing point. Does that make sense? Because, oh my gosh, it's going to be a nightmare trying to make it look intentional if that's messed up. Trust me, I would know. Is this perfect? Absolutely not. Do I care? No, not at all. So now that I have that in place, that's going to help us a lot with figuring out where everything else goes. So now I know that this doorway is just, if I was to measure, so here's about my halfway point on my frame. Here's my halfway point on my frame. So the door is basically, the halfway point is like the in between the top of the door and the center line that I just drew. Now this line, thinking about doorways, they probably, once I get way, way, way down here, they probably end up about yay high. And so I'm going to make my doorway appropriate to that as well. I'm actually going to bring it down even further. And then I also don't want it to be in the center. If I'm looking at measurements here, it's almost to the center, but I don't let that trip you up, because sometimes it's like, oh gosh, okay, so I really want to bring it over further, but that might mess everything up. So I think I'll trust the process as much as I don't want to. I'm going to bring it down a little lower. I'm going to have that reach door frame about here. It's real, real skinny. And then I'm just going to bring it straight down. And you don't see it straight down in the picture. That's probably part of the lens. So like the wide angle deal. Some of you were saying last week that your images, like, or your drawings rather, they would always look like they were kind of tilted. It's totally like an aesthetic too. Because nothing is tilted on mine, I'm going to bring it straight down. But just know, like, if you end up having that situation where something looks a little bit tilted or wonky or slanted or whatever, it's totally okay also. Okay, so I'm going to frame this. And then I like to draw on the inside this horizontal line, because that's showing ceiling versus wall. And sometimes you'll start to see the doorway peek through. And this one, we're lucky that we can't, because that would probably confuse everyone more. But something I like to do, even though I'm not ready to add shading yet, I will just do the top little point where the ceiling part connects to the wall part. And that's just so that I don't feel absolutely insane. Like, that's the truth of it. I just don't want it to be tripping me up like crazy. The next doorways along this whole thing, you can't see anything. They are like the tiniest. Like, if we were to 3D to 2D mindset this, they look, I'll draw one right here. They look like, I mean, they're literally slivers. They're nothing. So just know that they're going along this space here. So dot, if you have to dot it down, I'll probably do it steeper than that. This could have been, yeah. And then look at spacing. So spacing is the one thing to pay attention to. You're going to have more spacing closer to you, less. So it's about the same width as what I have in the doorway. So if I think about the doorway, the width, and then the next part, I'll put it probably about right here, and then have the top of it. I mean, but see, it's just a sliver. It's a very small sliver. And then they start to, and then I don't even measure, because they just start getting so
condensed that you don't even really notice. And so what you are mainly noticing is what's closest to you, which is why I focused on that first, and the rest of it just kind of fell into play. So when you have, like, let's say you took, you're viewing this, if you took 2 steps over, you're going to have a lot more room to play with this. But that's kind of how you would think of it, is like, pay attention to measuring and then pay attention to the spacing. And the next one's going to be skinnier. The next spacing will be skinnier, and so on. But they're all going to go along that line and whatnot. So there are like little, things along the wall, whether they be indents or signs or electrical, anything. I don't deal with those yet. I don't want to let that distract me on my, framing portion. We're not getting into color today, I'll tell you that, but that's okay, because next week is like all the fun stuff. I was looking at the time like, oh my gosh, really? Time flies when you're having fun. So if I raise this, if I look at the top part of this now, and I think about where these balconies sit, I think I want to start with the one above the door. And if you think about, like, take away the balcony and you look at just the doorway, it's pretty much in line. The reason it doesn't look in line in this photo, again, is the lens distortion. But because I'm not doing a lens distortion on my deal, I'm going to draw it just right above it. So I know that this is the bottom, and I'll draw that in a little bit, but right now I just want to have the same width-ish. Doesn't have to be perfect. And then leave some room in between, because actually I don't think I even want to. I mean, I do. I was just thinking, like, whatever this is, because it's like a balcony on top of that, but none of the other ones feature that. And I feel like it would be distracting since it's the top of our page. So creative choice time. I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to fence this guy in. So I have this general shape, and then you can see that technically that is actually sitting off of what's happened. Okay, here's a good example of a mistake and how you can fix it. On your image, you're going to see this better than you see it through the camera, but you'll see you'll see the left side and the front side of this gate, right? So there's a center part of it, and that's showing side A and side B. I drew in the equivalent of a door frame instead of looking at a side A and side B. So I actually, and because of the placement, while I could have that act as the door frame, actually, no, I will have it act as the door frame. That's kind of behind that, and then I'll add this on. But the main focus here is I want you to be able to separate side A from side B, just like we did with the walls up here. So I'm going to bring the gate, the center of the gate, because it looks like it's split about evenly, and I'm going to bring it just above the door frame. And the reason for that is, you see it that way, but also it's because this horizontal line is going to connect, and that's the side we see. And then the rest of it is going to follow the door frame and then come down with it, and then have those bars. And, as I'm drawing this in, I kind of wish that I hadn't. I kind of wish I had kept it like what is it called? A regular balcony, because I feel like this is just too much. But the differentiation comes in when we do these horizontal lines on the sides that are facing us, and then having those also be guided downwards. So you can see it now. I just feel like I kind of wish that I had just left it as a balcony that's shorter. I know that's what it is in the image. I don't know. Creative choices. I'll do one more of those. I know I'm not doing the one that is peekabooing in right here. For me, it would have been too distracting. I'm going to do one more of these just about here, and then I'll do the rest of them normal. Or actually, I think this one will be a normal one, and then the one after that, just for a balance. I just don't like it. But if you have that happen where you put one in and you just don't like it, like I'm just talking you through my brainstorming because this is exactly what I would be thinking in my head as I'm drawing it. I wouldn't be hung up on it by any means. It would just be like, more of an observation, I guess. Okay, so see how that turns into a door frame, but I'm not going to have it be as prominent. I'm just going to push it in there, and then I'll add a shorter version of what I had just drawn to make that balcony. See what I mean? And then it kind of forms. I'll just add a few more lines, and then I'll do another skinny version of this guy without much form. Okay, that seems fine. And then I can add a bunch of shading into this one so that it's different from the others, and you can see that it's different from the others. So I did like light hatching, and then I'm going to do almost like solid hatching within the door frame so that you can see that it is inset. There we go. I don't know. I'm not super stoked with that part, but when we get done with everything, it's not going to be something we notice like significantly. Now I want to do these little platforms. I should have done that before I added all this detail, but what I can do to preserve that a little bit is actually just so where this corner meets, and then it can shoot out just beyond the edge and then connect. And I can just shade these really well because they're going to be technically they're underneath, you know, so we're seeing them from below. So why wouldn't there be shading there? I mean, there is even here, but that's how you can get that in there. Okay, let's see. Canna, that makes me so happy. This is the best way for me to really learn, appreciate process rather than perfectly curated video. I couldn't agree more. It's one of the reasons why I love workshops, because you get to problem solve so much. Like there's so much problem solving. And I think that that's a lot of it as we learn, because I think, you know, you get to an area that you're kind of stumped and it just feels like it's like you almost feel like your face flush. You know what I mean? Like it just is this frustrating, like, this can't be salvaged kind of feeling. And really, I think personally, I really believe after doing this enough, I think it all can be salvaged and it all looks really cute afterwards. Because when I look up at the screen, I'm seeing what you guys are seeing, but I'm seeing it differently than when I was just in it. You know what I mean? And I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh, that's really coming together. So I see it way differently. So if you ever get stuck, just like look away for a little bit and then come back to it. And it's like, oh no, that's coming along. And then you kind of know where to reset and continue. If that makes sense. So with this awning, I'm going to do the same thing I did to the top here, this building. And I like to put in texture, but I don't like to like cover it in texture because I think it's just, it can be a little too much. And then this doorway, I'm going to just draw that little sliver of space here and then a sliver of space at the top. And I know you can't really see a sliver of space at the top, but I'm doing it anyway because it's helping with the eye knowing that that is an actual doorway. So another creative choice. I'm going to do the same thing I did from this side to this side of the building. It's not going to take nearly as much time because there is not as much detail, but I will have that point down and I'll just do these tiny, I mean, this is literally how much time I would take to do this anyway, is just mark making basically, just to show that something is there. And then maybe a couple lines here, but you saw that took nothing. Now I can add greenery, and I do this in, actually, before we do that, because I don't know, we're going to be at time. There are more buildings, but we can always forge those in by, you know, just doing these like faded in the background kind of things and call it like good just doing that, because we don't want to draw attention to what's in the background. I like to fade those out, but okay, I want to do this first. if you guys can stay a couple minutes later, I would love it. If you can't, there will be a replay. But I get excited about green. We did greenery last week, so you definitely don't need to stay for that part. So I'll save that part for the end. But the front here, so there's this courtyard. So the curb is slanted and it goes about in the middle of the walkway, and then it goes just underneath this building. So it's just going to be, I'm going to do it imperfectly because it's kind of cobblestoney, like so. But then this part we didn't do last week. I was really excited to figure this out when I was first learning, because there's something about cobblestone or brick or anything like that when it's on the ground going away from you. And I like to do this where I'm going to do this larger than I'm actually going to do it so you can see it. But when it's closer to you, these imperfect shapes like this, like if this is cobblestone, they're going to be wider. And as they get away from you, they're going to be smaller, but they're also going to be skinnier, like so. But then the further away they get, they almost turn into like lines, like little specks. And that is showing depth. So this is actually way too wide, but I wanted to give you a visual of like, okay, if I was looking at it from above, that's what it would look like. But if it's from the side, and then it just gets skinnier and skinnier. So in a smaller scale, I'm using the same tip for all of this, by the way, it's an 05. If I switch to an 01 now, I could, but everything else here is in an 05, so it wouldn't look correctly balanced. But if you do like to switch between pen tips, this would be something that I would probably start with a thicker one and then go into a thinner one. I don't think that's ever going to be me because I am way too impatient. Okay, so but basically cobblestone-y types of streets. So I have this detail closer to me, okay? And I'm only going to do them in bunches like that. I don't need to do the whole entire thing because that's too much. There's so much more to see when less is there because our imaginations will put those things together for us. So from there, I'm just going to get smaller and then almost like just little specks. And that's it. Like that's all. So I'm going to bring this in. That's all that needs to happen for any sort of like, I'm doing this so light because I don't want to, for any sort of eluded texture in like a street or anything like that, and bricklay and whatnot. So that's all I'm going to do. And just in like these little clusters, because it makes it so much more, I don't know, it just makes it more interesting. So the next part, I just want to share it. So this is a creative choice, real quick before we get into greenery. You might want to wait until the end to see what you want to do, but this is a walkway through. So that means that there is a building, like the building is open at some point, like open, at some point, and inside, and the light is getting in, and this is not like a door, it's a doorway to get into, and that's really common in Europe. And I can draw that in, but is that going to confuse us? So to simplify it, I can mark where like the bottom, I'm not going to bring it all the way out. There's something in the way here, but I'm just going to like imagine through it and bring the ground to about here, and then just bring a wall up to right here, and then maybe a doorway here. And now that looks kind of weird because we don't have any shading involved. So that's where I can do stippling or something like it, similar to how we did the cobblestone, but only toward the base to show that there's, ground in here. I'm just choosing stippling because it's a form of mark making. There's not like a solid reason why that's, what I needed to choose. And then I'm going to create a lot of shading within this doorway within the door frame by hatching. Now, if you're watching this and you're like, I don't like how this is turning out, well, that answers your question on what you want to do. Maybe you don't want to do any of that at all, and you just want to do this part as the whole, and that's fine too. I just wanted to share that, like, that's kind of one of those tricky things where you're gonna not really be sure of how it's going to end up, unless you have, some sort of, like, because I made up what was in here. I wasn't drawing what I actually saw because I didn't like what I actually saw. So that makes a difference. All right, so that's there. I feel fine about it. I'm going to re-emphasize this doorway just so that that's the main focal point. Okay, that feels better to me. So having the foreground be darker than the background is helpful in depth. Well, technically not true. The more detail in the foreground is better for depth. And then if it gets darker in certain areas, like on the right side here, if I add hatching and the bottom, it would show the light source coming from this way. And the more places that I add that, the more it will feel like there is depth and like it has more finish to it. So I'm going to do that under balconies. I'm going to do that near windows and so on. And you'll start to see that come to life just from simple hatching. All right, so greenery time. I'm going to do some scribbles. We did this last week. I'm a scribbler. It's how I like to put greenery in. Instead of holding my pen here, I scoot up on it quite a bit and I just like let things happen the way that they should. If I start putting this tree in here and I'm seeing that it's not really covering things the way I'd want, the reason why I said I wanted to add color is because I think we might pause actually, because I think it would be cool to add color to what we're working on right now next week, or at least in the very beginning of it. I can show you how I would do that. And the reason why it matters is because I could add mark making a few more places to like give the illusion of this tree coming in and having the depth that we wanted, but you can also create that same effect with just color. Like you don't even need to have all the mark making, all the shadows, all the stuff, because you can do color washes. So yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to revisit. Oh man, I really want to do it now. I value you guys' time. We have so much that we are going to play with next week. So it's fine. It's fine because I want you guys to focus more on the principles of what we talked about and then put that into practice. And if you want to do and apply what we learned next week about color into this, then you can totally do that at that time. And it's going to be so easy, you guys. Like you're going to think like how it's like cake. Like after this week, everything is cake because you've learned foundations and it's just practice now. But I'm just going to do light shading. I'm not going to do a ton just because I'm going to show you how I would do that with color as my little helper. So basically just light hatching, and I can always add more later. So greenery, I'm just going to do the scribble. It looks really weird, I know. And then there's greenery coming down here. So I just do these scribbles. I like to leave a little bit of white space if I'm ever doing anything having to show bulk of any kind. And there's a lot of greenery around this area. So see, like, you don't even know what this is. Like, this doesn't make any sense. But if I was to define it just a smidge more, like we did with the house, you can see like, okay, that's a bush, that's a bush, that's a bush, that's a tree, whatever. These are little friends. Same deal goes here. But washes with color can be like really bring things to life. Okay, so I'm going to do 3 little pots right here at the top. I know those aren't technically pots, or what it actually looks like, but it is what I'm choosing to do because it will show detail the way that it will make sense in the sketch versus trying to make things look too much like, too perfect. And there's these pots. This is another thing. There's a lot of pots in windows, which is really fun. So here I'm just doing these quick lines and then just like they look like if I was to do it here larger, just these little pots and then do squiggly lines coming out of it. And that's about it. If I wasn't going to add color, I could just do little circles, and those can, or just like little scribbles. Those can represent flowers. They're so small that I don't want you guys to be trying to put so much detail into something that is just going to get lost in the big picture anyway, if that makes sense. You'll see right here, there's a huge gap, and that was user error, I guess. And you're going to have huge gaps all the time, and that's a-okay. Here's a fun creative choice. If you add these little ledges, then you can add little shrubs that will totally go along with the whole theme of having this greenery all over. And then all of a sudden that's filled. So we wouldn't have to fill it. We could have shaded it in, but I think that this is also a really fun approach. Okay, we're wrapping up, I promise. I just get super excited. Yeah, and I like leaving the sky clear because I want to show you a cool wash with that. Maybe I'm going to think about it and see. And by that, I mean in the moment when we get into it next week. If these dots are bothering you in the background, you can just do like any sort of shading over that area, cross hatch it. And then it just kind of gets lost back there without drawing too much attention to it. You'll see I did a lot of shading here and a lot of shading here. So there's a little bit of an off balance. So to fix that, I would just darken some areas up that I would want to like really bring attention to. So that's going to be this tree, just at the base of it, not everywhere else, because too much is going to be like too blobby. But then maybe these frames, I'll just go over once. I will get some shading over here, some more. And now see how that just brought a little more balance into things. It wasn't a ton, but it was enough to where it made it so there wasn't just like one really like obvious, one really obvious dark spot and not the rest, if that makes sense. Okay, so that's where our stopping point is. This sketch I would consider finished, with or without water. So that's the part that's really, or excuse me, water, with or without color. I was thinking about watercolor. You can use anything that you want, but yeah, so I would consider it finished. And that's another part is like, well, when do I stop? When do I stop? When you see a balance, when you can take a break, walk away. I do want to add, there we go. Sorry for the vacuum. Laura made me tell her when she would be allowed to vacuum, and I said no earlier than 10. And she like really took that literally, I guess, and is only vacuuming directly above me. So that's fun. Okay. But yeah, so that's how to create that balance. I mean, if you look away from it for a while and then you come back to it, you're like, oh gosh, that is like a really cute, fun sketch. I think the only thing that I would consider not being finished is the tree, because I would add just some shading, like a little bit inside of it, not too much, but I want to do that with color next week. Is the only reason I left it open. So I love this chat. But yeah, Diane said it's funny when you walk away thinking your project is garbage and you come back the next day and you're like, oh, wow, I kind of like it. Totally exactly this process. This is exactly what sketching does to me every single time. And I think that that's like one of the reasons why I love it so much, is because it forces you to like look at the ugly that you created and then sit with it and feel really uncomfortable. And then when you return to it, it's like, oh, this isn't like at all what I was thinking yesterday. This is actually kind of cool. And then you might see like two things you want to tweak real quick, or you might not, like, and then it just becomes this piece that you are much more proud of. And that's just because you were able to stick with it. So just as a reminder, for urban sketching in general, I have never used a pencil, and I feel really Like I would not have it any other way. I'm so glad that I never used a pencil, because I'll use pencil now for like, more intricate floral pieces that I'm going to like watercolor or something. And I didn't at first. I went straight in with paint and did loose styles. And so I think that was really a blessing in a way, because it forced me to be able to identify and correct so that I didn't just keep throwing everything away. Because it's so easy to do that when you're like, oh, well, if only I'd used pencil first, then I could have made this work. But since I didn't, I have to throw it away, because you absolutely don't. Also, sketching in a sketchbook is your best friend, because this thing's not going to judge you, and you're going to be able to do so much inside of it. So, all right. That being said, thank you guys so much for hanging out. I know that this was a lot. Please feel free to walk through it again. But more than anything, just remember like the key rules of the order you want to go in. So just identify vanishing point, horizon line, shapes, and scale. And remember, a lot of it's eyeballing. And I know that that's not like, any actual art teacher would roll their eyes at me for saying that, but like, I mean, I have a best-selling book, so I'm also really good friends with James Richards. No, he was like my idol when I first learned about urban sketching. So if you haven't looked him up, he's just so good and just so wonderful. James Richards, he's JR Sketchbook on Instagram, and he wrote the foreword in Mindful Sketching. So you guys will see that too. He's in the book too. But anyway, this is just a beautiful art form. Everybody's style is so different and will evolve differently. So thank you so much for sharing that passion with me. I hope that you feel a little liberated and just like ready to let loose and not be so perfect about things, and just allow creativity to truly flow. So I wish I could talk to you guys, like actually talk when we were all in person, but have the best week, and I will see you next week. Yes, we will need some form of color. I don't care what you use. It can be anything. I'm going to use watercolor. I'm going to talk about specific watercolor techniques, but I mean, it all can kind of be applied across the board. Okay, you guys, I'll see you so soon. Thank you. Bye.